Good morning. We'll call the August 24th, 2016 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency to order. We'll have flag salute now. I'd like to ask our appointment from Rockland, Council Member Scott Ewell, to please lead us in the pledge.
It starts with I. I'd be honored. Thank you. Salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the clerk please call roll?
Baker. Here. Pesh. Here. Holmes.
Here.
Nader. Nesbitt. Here. Rohan.
Here.
Mueller.
Here.
Ewell.
Here.
The next item on our agenda is the approval of minutes. Is there any correction? All right.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain?
I think I'd abstain.
All right. We have one abstinence. All right. We're on agenda review. Celia, is there anything new to add or change?
No, nothing.
All right, we'll go ahead and proceed then. We're on item number E. This is public comment. This is a time on our agenda for anyone who wishes to address this board on an item that is not on the agenda to come forward and speak. Does anyone wish to speak to us? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Item F is our consent calendar. We have 4 items, all of which are considered non-controversial. It's proposed that we approve these items with one motion. However, a director or a member of the public may remove an item if you wish. Does anyone wish to remove an item?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would like to remove item number 3.
All right. Okay. We'll remove item number 3 for separate discussion. Is there anyone else who wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar? Is there a motion then to approve the balance of the consent calendar?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right. The consent calendar is approved. We'll move on then to item number 3 and start. Keith, are you looking for a staff report, or do you have a particular question?
I just have one quick question that pops out at me whenever we're spending money. On page 6 of our staff report, it talks about the costs of the above services are estimated at $15,000. This sum includes payment for taxes, insurance, and fringe benefits. Define fringe benefits for me.
What that is the staffing costs. That includes the fully, the full staffing costs, including overhead.
Okay, because fringe benefits to me sounds like, well, we're buying them meals, or they're walking away with bracelets or something like that. So
No, it's what that means is the overhead, the medical, dental, those kind of fringe benefits that are built into the overhead of staffing.
okay, I would appreciate that being defined in the document next time. I see fringe benefits, and I feel like there's a waste of taxpayers' funds. That's it.
Might it just be called, employee benefits?
Yeah.
That better defined.
Yeah, it's happy to make that change.
Thanks. No other questions?
You want to move approval of that?
Keith, did you offer a motion with that amendment?
No, I thought since we pulled it, don't we have to have public comment on it?
Okay, yes, we do. Thank you. All right. Directors, are there any other questions or comments? All right, I'd like to open this up to the public. Does anyone from the public wish to address this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. All right.
Seeing none, Madam Chair, I will move approval of the item with the amendment noted.
All right. All right, we have a motion and a second. Do you want a roll call then?
Normally if there's any controversy, then we do a roll call,
All right.
but otherwise
okay,
it can
then
be just...
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, motion passes. All right, we will now move on. We will now adjourn as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and convene as the Airport Land Use Commission. Item G is a public hearing on a general plan amendment and rezone consistency determination for Lakeside 6, phases 7 and 8. We'll start with the staff report.
Good morning. I will be handling this item. So we're asking the board to conduct a public hearing regarding the consistency of Lakeside 6, phases 7 and 8. For now on, I'm going to just call it Lakeside 6. And the general plan amendment and rezone for that project and its compatibility with the Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And we're recommending that the board find Lakeside 6, the general plan amendment and rezone, is consistent with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. As required under state law, general plan amendments, specific plans, rezones, and amendments thereto have to come to the Airport Land Use Commission. So following that procedure, the City of Lincoln submitted the Lakeside 6 project to the Airport Land Use Commission for consistency review. And the phases 7 and 8 of Lakeside 6, it's an 11-acre parcel within a larger project called the Lincoln Air Center Plan. And the Lincoln Air Center Plan was approved, I guess, several years ago, and it has an airspace easement that covers that particular project area. So the Lakeside 6 plan in the current city general plan is designated as high-density residential, and it's zoned at 15 units per acre. And so to refresh the board's memory, back in 2014, the City of Lincoln general plan was determined by this board to be compatible with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. So the high-density residential land use and zoning are currently consistent. So with the proposal here, which is a downzoning to medium density and zoning at 8.5 units per acre, from our perspective, the proposal is consistent with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. The board has three choices here to find it consistent as recommended by staff, consistent subject to conditions, or inconsistent based upon specific actions that you would need to determine. There was a public review period for this project. Public noticing requires that we notice in the newspaper of record within the airport area, and that would be the Lincoln Messenger. That was done 10 days ago. We sent notices to all the property owners within 300 feet of the proposed project, as well as there's a stakeholder list that we developed as part of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan process. And so for Lincoln Airport, we have a specific stakeholder list, and we emailed to those individuals. We did receive 2 inquiries from the public. Property owners that live close by wanted to know about the project. I got this notice in the mail. What does this mean? Who is the Airport Land Use Commission? You know, what do they do? And after I went through and explained to them the project, they were more than satisfied that, and particularly were actually quite pleased with the proposed downzoning. But that is an action for the City of Lincoln to eventually take. As part of the analysis, as I mentioned, the residential development normally in a C2 zone, which is where this project is located, and there is a map that shows the project as it relates to the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for the Lincoln Airport. Within the C2 zone, residential development is normally compatible. It requires what's called notification, overflight notification. But because the Lakeside 6 is part of the larger Lincoln Air Center plan, and that project already has an airspace easement which satisfies that notification requirement, there is no need to have an overflight notification condition recommended for this particular project. So we satisfy that factor. In terms of safety, we're downzoning, so we're having less people per acre associated with noise and safety issues, so that is a plus. And there are no airspace protection issues because there's nothing associated with this development that's going to penetrate navigable airspace. So with that, the staff is recommending that the board find the Lakeside 6, phases 7 and 8, general plan amendment rezone consistent with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. We presented this to our TAC, that the TAC concurred, and the only other thing I'd mention is the applicant, Murier Investments, is here in the audience in case there's any questions, and there's also a staff person from the City of Lincoln available if there are any questions of the board. And with that, I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Directors, does anyone have any clarification questions before I open it to the public? Tony?
Yes, thank you. I do have a clarification, and you did touch base on it already, and I'm trying to understand for my own benefit. I think it's great. I don't have any problem with the action requested. If I were to buy a house in these new homes and the flyover right-of-way is already included, is that a written notice? In other words, I've never heard of a flyover easement, and I'm trying to understand where in the disclosure documents that would be. Not that that has any bearing on what we're talking about. I'm just trying to learn something.
I believe it would be included in the homeowner's title report, preliminary title report. That there would be amongst the many items, in terms of sewer easements, public utility easements. I believe because I was sent a copy of the title report for the larger Lincoln Air Center, and it shows that an airspace, technically called an avigation easement, and that was dedicated to the City of Lincoln with approval of that project.
Great. Thank you. That helped.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Chief.
Just to clarify, and you could probably clarify this too, that document comes to the potential buyer in the form of a preliminary title report that they see before any contingencies are released on the property and everything. So they know in time that if that's a problem that they can be out of the deal. So it's before all contingencies are released, they have that information.
That's really what I was looking for. Thank you very much. Bingo.
Any other questions or clarifications? Okay, I'd like to open this up to the public then. Does anyone from the public wish to address this body? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. There is a staff recommendation to move forward. Is there a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, I'll move for the staff recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Baker.
Yes.
Pesch.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Nader.
Yes.
Nesbitt. Rohan.
Yes.
Mueller. Buell.
Motion passes. We'll now adjourn as the Airport Land Use Commission and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. We're on agenda item H. This is a Placer County Regional Bikeway Plan update.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be taking this item. And good morning, Board of Directors. As included in your staff report this morning, there's the update to the bicycle master plan or bikeway plan for the county. I wanted to spend just a few minutes on a little bit of background on it, but more importantly, how we intend to update this regional bikeway plan and how we intend to reach it, as well as how do we include the community and the unincorporated county residents on this important plan. But in doing so, also looking to each of you to provide any suggestions, recommendations, and input on how we might make this update a success. The plan was originally developed back in 2001 by PCTPA. This plan was developed in coordination with the county, much as it is now. This plan was really led to fruition because of changing funding programs at the state level. The bicycle transportation account required for any cities, counties to receive funding from the competitive bicycle transportation account back in the early 2000s, that they had to have a regional plan that established the facilities, that established project lists, priority lists, as well as funding. So this plan became so in the county and incorporated all the plans from the cities and later on to led the cities themselves to update and refine their own plans. This plan was adopted by Placer County Board of Supervisors back in 2002, and here we are 14 years later looking to refresh the vision for cycling in the unincorporated community areas. Now, why I say that the focus is on the unincorporated areas, it's not a redo for the incorporated cities. Each of you have your own bikeway plans or are embarking on updating those plans probably within the next year or two based on conversations with staff. However, I do want to say, though, it is important for us to continue to work with our staffs to provide updates to each of you on how we're proceeding with this, because it's important for us to make sure we have that coordination with the cities, to make sure that there are no gaps in the bikeway system between unincorporated areas, incorporated areas, to understand where the plans are, and also to make sure that we're utilizing your staff as conduits to get information out about this plan. And I have a slide later that I'll point to this, but while this is focused on unincorporated roadways and facilities, a lot of community members from each of the incorporated cities utilize these unincorporated roadways for cycling. A lot for recreation. Some may even use it for commuting. We've received a number of calls about Taylor Road. Taylor Road connects many different community centers and several different jurisdictions. So that is an example of why coordination will be so important with each of your members and your staff. I think we can all attest to there's a lot that's happened in the county since 2002, since the development of this plan. Population numbers have soared both in the unincorporated areas and in the unincorporated area itself. The development of the local bikeway plans, as I mentioned, in each of the cities. Roseville's going on their second update another year or so. Lincoln, I've talked to your staff. You're looking to potentially down the road another few years update your bicycle master plan and refresh it also. So there's a lot of things at play here. And with a document dating back from 2002, there's some potential gaps there. So we want to make sure that we're stitching together everyone's plans, everyone's ideas, and making sure we're documenting what has happened. More importantly, as back in 2001 and 2002 with the development of the plan, our funding landscape has again changed on us. Also, the planning landscape for which we look at bikeway facilities has also changed. Back in 2013, SB 99 and AB 101 from state legislature, what they did was maybe somewhat novel. They took 4 different funding programs from both the feds and the states and combined it into one funding program. And I think we've talked here about so many different silos in funding and how challenging it can be to navigate it. They created one funding pot. It is now a competitive statewide funding program dedicated towards bicycle and pedestrian projects in the state. It's become a highly competitive program at that. But it does make the field a little bit more it allows us to understand what we're going after and what are the rules for that. It has also brought a lot of different players into the planning realm, from public health advocates to school districts. Safe Routes to School programs are now part of this program. So it's taken a bunch of different sectors, a bunch of different programs with interest, and combined it into one program. And in updating this plan, it'll help establish a baseline for the county as well as incorporated cities to look at future bikeway programs, projects, and be able to apply through the ATP program, the Active Transportation Program, to apply for funding. And I mentioned the cities also because as part of this plan, we're identifying and focusing on planning for the county, but we're pulling in the existing plans from the incorporated cities to show the region-wide benefits. And also, I just want to pause here to note that this is the third cycle that we're currently in for this active transportation program, and we've been relatively successful in our county. Both the cities of Roseville, Auburn, and Colfax were successful in Cycle 1, which was 2 years ago. Cycle 2, Loomis was successful in receiving funds from the active transportation program, and currently Cycle 3 applications have been in. We've had a number of applications submitted from your jurisdiction. So we'll find out later this year how the success rate is for this third cycle. So what we intend to accomplish with this is looking at how do we refine and refresh the vision for the regional bikeway plan. It is, one, going to be taking a look at what are the local bikeway plans, as I mentioned, the community plan updates that have been established since 2002, taking a look at the connectivity assessment, looking at really are there any gaps in the systems from what we've planned which each of our jurisdictions may have planned for, what the counties planned for, which these community plans have considered. So we want to find out, are there any gaps? We also want to make sure we're taking in public input, and I'll get to that in a later slide, because I think it is very important and critical for us in developing a successful plan that's going to be essentially used by residents from all our communities. A suitability assessment will be really the fourth component here, and that looks at looking at the roadways. What type of facility might be appropriate for that? We have Class 1 bikeways, which are typically a separated bikeway and its own path off street. We have Class 2 bikeways, Class 3 bikeways, which are on the street and share either have a designated lane or share a piece of the road with vehicles. So we want to look at what are the most appropriate type of bikeways for the roadways we have in the county, and maybe which treatments are appropriate when you're spanning multiple jurisdictions. Out of those analyses will come a set of recommendations. And so those recommendations will be a great point, one of many, to reach out to the public, to the communities, to the jurisdictions, and make sure that we're on the right track in terms of identifying the future bikeway within the county. And lastly, one of the outputs is the implementation plan, a plan that identifies what are priorities based on these different projects. And there's different ways that we could prioritize these projects based on areas, based on types of facilities, and that's all work that we will come to develop with our steering committee that I'll discuss, and also through public input. It's very important to make sure that the implementation plan is something that is supported by the community members, but also something that the county, the jurisdictions can implement in a timely manner and look at what are our best chances for getting funding for these various projects. So how do we get there? I've just mentioned the steering committee that will play a part in this. I've mentioned public outreach. And so what I want to do is kind of focus on the bottom three tiers here, or the bottom tier here. But PCTPA will be the lead on this effort. We'll be working in close coordination with Placer County, public works staff, to develop this plan and to look at the contents of it. We will seek consultant services to help develop this plan. We did receive $51,000 from a rural planning assistance grant, which was a competitive grant to help fund this exercise. But in doing so, we're looking for a consultant to help us creatively develop this plan consistent with the new active transportation program guidelines, and to determine how do we reach out to the different interests within the county, from the avid cyclists who are the I'm going to get there regardless of the weather, the conditions, how much cars are on the road, to the recreational cyclist who's going to go out and try to find those roadways with minimal cars on there, and to the everyday family or children who are riding this facility. So we're going to look at how do we reach out to the various interest groups, geographic areas of the county, and experience levels through the consultant. We have three different ways to receive that input. One is through our technical advisory committee. That technical advisory committee is made up of representatives from each of the public works staff who we meet with monthly on a variety of topics. So we'll be able to continue to bring them updates on a monthly basis, look for direction and how we move forward with this. And we can also do one-on-one meetings to discuss individually how this plan relates directly and connects with their cities, and for us to help them utilize them as a conduit to get information out about public outreach. The Regional Bikeway Steering Committee will play an equally important role. We envision this role to be one of the users of the facilities. So looking at a makeup of residents and cyclists, either individuals or from bicycling clubs from each of the supervisorial districts, looking directly at individuals from cycling clubs, shops. I know we have a number of shops here in Auburn. There's also a number down in Roseville and in Rockland. So we don't have, or we do have a good stakeholder base out there to look to for input. And we want to make sure that as we're developing this plan, that these individuals who are using this are in tune and are advising us on what are the best options. CHP, you may wonder, well, why are they involved? In talking with the county, we've often found out that there's a number of enforcement questions that come up. And I think as part of the education, engineering, and enforcement of this, those kind of three E's typically come together in planning level documents such as this. So we will be looking to incorporate them and receive any feedback they may have, as well as share any knowledge. And lastly, public outreach. I mentioned this geographically, the county is very diverse. And when we're talking about from the county, we're really talking about from here in South Placer, Roseville, Rockland, Loomis areas, Lincoln, all the way up to Colfax. there's quite a bit of different interest there. So how do we reach out? It may be cost prohibitive, as I mentioned, $51,000 to go out to every single area. But I think we can accomplish this with a diverse public outreach and social media, a web-based presence, and I'll show that in the next slide. But we do need to make sure that we're getting out to municipal advisory committees. We will host workshops strategically, and we may even include going directly to bike clubs or some shops. These are all the details that we're going to work out with the consultant, work out with the county, make sure that we are reaching out, and make sure we're getting sufficient information back. This slide just illustrates two relatively low-cost and effective tools that we could use to gain input from the web and from social media. One is CycleSack. This is an app that you can download for your phone. It can take individual riders, track their routes. They can actually identify whether they thought that route was a good route, the quality of it, whether they enjoyed the route or not. So that can help feed into the understanding of what routes are being used, whether they're good quality routes, whether there's issues on those routes or not. And then the lower right map is one that we could actually use through Google, one that we could establish a map, could allow individuals to come there, identify routes that they would like, identify concerns that they may have. So these are tools, low cost and quite effective tools in the absence of being able to go out to every community, every single neighborhood. And it's just one more way that we can gain information and insight. So to wrap up and highlighting the milestones and the schedule for this, later this week, beginning of next week, we're looking to release the RFP based on any direction we receive today. Conversations we're having with the county staff and fine-tuning that to look for a consultant to creatively reach out and identify and make recommendations for a bikeway system. We'll come back to you in October with a consultant selection, a recommendation and selection process, and then kick off during the fall and winter the assessment of the existing conditions, gap analysis, in that part of the later part of this year. Come back in the spring with some opportunities. Those opportunities may stem from knowing gaps in the system, recommendations that will come from the public through workshops, through the steering committee, and then proceed into the summer with draft recommendations and following up with that with an actual document and a plan in the fall, and hopefully coming back to the board for acceptance of the plan in the winter of 2017. And throughout the entirety of this, we'll be reaching out to the municipal advisory committees, our technical advisory committee, through social media and public workshops to really gain input and feedback on the development of the plan. So with that, in closing, I'd be glad to take any direction, feedback you may have on this regional bikeway plan update and how we can better coordinate with each of the jurisdictions. So thank you.
Thank you. Directors, other questions? Yes, Stan.
Thank you. As battery technology improves, and I've even seen motorized bicycles, how does that mix with people that are just doing it the old-fashioned way? To me, that would seem like not a good fit, because those vehicles, I've seen those bikes, and they're moving at a pretty high rate of speed. Are we contemplating the impact of that as we go on into the future?
That would be one of the areas that I anticipate to come up during discussion on this. Much as regular everyday cyclists, maybe such as myself, may not be as comfortable on a trail with the cyclist who's going by me at 25 miles an hour. So I know for those avid cyclers. So we do need to take that into consideration, and hopefully through conversation with bike clubs or shops and understanding how many of these they're selling, how do we develop a system to accommodate them and to ensure that there's safety between the different types of users?
Thank you.
Well,
Yes,
the mic's
Tom.
open. I have a follow-on question. I had written down skateboards. Now, it seems to me you talk about an incompatible use as a high-speed bike and a skateboard, but I just got back from a few weeks out of state, and I'm noticing, especially in college towns, it's a standard way of commuting between home and college. Get on the bike trail with your skateboard and your backpack and go forward. And they seem to be doing it in Idaho. I didn't have time I didn't take the time in Idaho to go look something up. But Has that been discussed, or is that likely to come up in a discussion? It's a viable mode of transportation. Now we have to start looking at it.
Yeah, it's a viable mode, and just yesterday I was actually going into a meeting, saw a gentleman walking in with his briefcase and his skateboard. So, it's not just for, I guess, college kids anymore. But,
Gotcha.
It's one of those things, again, we'll have to consider and based on the feedback we receive, and it may be much different in the unincorporated area where we are really focusing on. I could definitely see it in the incorporated areas or portions of maybe even Granite Bay, as
Absolutely.
we consider that the county. But that is much like a neighborhood, or is much like a neighborhood as in any other location. So it could as well be a factor there.
I don't plan on using them myself. I just wanted to ask the question. Thank you.
Any other comments on this side?
So obviously, we're entering this planning phase, hoping that we're able to then move forward and implement with improvements out on roadways that yield some kind of results that increase safety for cyclists as well as vehicles in all of this. And knowing the limited dollars that we all have for these improvements, when, pardon me, setting aside the commuter cyclist who says, I have to get from point A to point B and back again, and looking at the recreational cyclist, which the majority of us are, when we plan our routes, we typically think, okay, I want to get in a decent ride today with some elevation, and I immediately start thinking, all right, what are the safest roads in the best condition? And that's how I plan where I'm going to go today. I know that Barton Road from Rockland Road up to Brace Road is awful, right? The condition is all torn up, so I don't want to ride that, even though it has less blind spots for drivers than, say, Layered Road, if I want to go layered up to Loomis and then get on and head on up. And so you're really taking into consideration the condition of the roadway and the safety challenges. And where I, as a cyclist and a driver, find the greatest safety challenges is on our rural roads where we have minimal shoulder on hills, where you have the limited line of sight. And so as a driver, I'm not comfortable moving out into the other lane, obeying California's new law that requires I give at least 3 feet of clearance to the cyclist. I'm not comfortable moving out into that other lane with that limited line of sight coming over. Whereas if I'm going the other direction or it's flat, I'm fine. I can continue at 45 miles an hour as the driver and go right around them and be just fine. So when we look at actually making improvements in the ground that create better cycling opportunities and better and fewer conflicts between drivers and cyclists, I think looking at those opportunities where we have existing right-of-way, we don't have to spend money acquiring right-of-way, have existing right-of-way, and some modest widening of the shoulders, especially going up hills, can provide an opportunity for the cyclists to move over and traffic to continue on its normal lanes. And then what I think you'll find is if you have those areas that are inherently safer, and because we've just gone out and done some work, they're going to be better, the cyclists will tend then to self-congregate. I mean, a lot of us will ride on Auburn-Folsom Road, even though there's a lot of traffic on Auburn-Folsom Road. It has nice wide shoulders, and it's in fairly good shape. Yeah. And very few of these parts where you have those hills that force the drivers into potentially head-on conflict with each other. It's Auburn-Folsom nice and wide. And so I think if you in the Granite Bay area, if you have one north-south route that becomes known as this is a safe route that's in good, you're going to peel people off of Val Verde, where you have a lot of these issues, and you're going to peel them off of Barton and maybe put them onto Wells, or whichever road we end up saying, this is going to be the cheapest opportunity based on existing right-of-way and opportunities to improve that widening in this area. And the cyclists will naturally figure out, okay, on my ride, this is the safest ride. So I think as we go forward with this plan, just looking at those places where we already have right-of-way and it's relatively cheap to make these kinds of widening improvements, particularly going into those hills, it'll improve things dramatically for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that is one of the core goals of, besides just refreshing the plan, is to make sure that this implementation plan considers facilities that are out there, the conditions, where cyclists are likely to go, but to position the county and for any regional project in here, the cities also, to go after the ATP funding for. That is going to be our best opportunity and potentially our biggest one-time through a grant source of funding to implement these improvements that we may be interested in.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments on this side? Jim?
Oh, I just wanted to take the opportunity to state that the transportation sales tax will be very important for bikeway improvements, so we'll be using some of those funds as well. So any of those cyclists out there that are listening, I want to make sure they support the transportation sales tax.
Brian?
Is there any way to link to or to get data from some of the existing apps that are already out there? There's some, probably 5 or 6 apps that people use. Is there a way that we can log data for them or from them in a region, and kind of use what they're already doing instead of reinventing the wheel? We can just say, hey, can we get a data for this regional area?
At a lot of time, you can at a cost. The apps that are out there and big data is, when I say big data, just crowdsourcing data, anonymous data is really becoming kind of a big area in terms of planning, performance, who's utilizing systems, whether it's a roadway or a datacom or data and technology. So yes, that is out there. I did show that slide of the CycleSack. That is a application that SACOG had built and that they utilize and had tried to get out there during the May is Bike Month. It is an open source program that they have. So it was one way for them to get around paying someone for data and be able to collect their own data from voluntary users. So that's really one option that we can look at and hopefully maybe promote through this activity, unless there's any other good recommendations that come up through a consultant.
Keith?
Just in coordinating with the jurisdictions that govern the cities, as Mr. Euler stated, that you may find a route that's safer and draw people off of other routes. And will the consultant be suggesting to the municipalities how they might make some minor adjustments so we have all that connectivity? In your workshops, you talked about having the bicyclists and the municipal advisory committees or whatever. Are you going to make this presentation to city councils or just workshops in different jurisdictions? I know we've got our own plans, but there's the connectivity issues that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, there's definitely connectivity issues, and we want to make sure that we have that. And primarily talking through our technical advisory committee. We hadn't anticipated going to each of the jurisdictions, but maybe something on the table for discussion on how we do that. Given our limited scope, though, that would be something we'll need to look at creatively. In terms of making recommendations, yes, I think making those recommendations where we see gaps between jurisdictions will be important. As I mentioned earlier, I know that some of the jurisdictions will be updating their plans in coming years, and so this could be useful information for them to carry forward and then implement in their own plans.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me you're going to have some workshops. You're going to establish kind of some the best routes and things like that, and then once we have a little bit of a preliminary plan, maybe some more workshops to make sure we have that connectivity, because you're going to be making some suggestions, and then we're going to be buying into that connectivity.
And we have not identified ideal workshop locations yet. But if we were to, go out to one of the rural communities, how many individuals will we get there versus maybe how many might we get if we're right there on the cusp of a jurisdiction or in a jurisdiction? So there's also the locational question we need to answer, but also facility questions. Where can we host a meeting from maybe a minimal 10, 15 people to potentially 100 people? So.
Let me add that, the public doesn't always know what jurisdiction they're in.
Right.
And so having workshops in various locations, whether they're in an incorporated city or unincorporated, the people who are interested in bicycling are going longer distances.
Right.
And so I don't know that it will make that much difference whether we're in an incorporated city or not. The idea is to get out into various areas and get that input. And then our thinking has been to work with your staff in terms of the the jurisdiction and how you might want to update your own bicycle plan. As Aaron alluded to, we don't have a huge budget for this.
Correct.
So there is somewhat of a limit in terms of that. That's why we're hoping to bring in your staffs to help bear the workload.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking. We have a bikeway plan that's evolving, so this would be the catalyst to, okay, let's evolve it to a point, but to where it's got the connectivity with everything that's happening around us.
Keith, I'd like to go back and revisit that topic. I have concerns in that same arena, but I'd like to open it up to the public right now. Does anyone from the public want to address this board? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. I'd like to ask the staff if they would go back to page 21 in the scope of work. Task 2.4 on page 21 refers to coordinating with Placer County to attend municipal advisory committee meetings to solicit input on the development of the recommended plan. There is nothing in this scope of work or any formal direction other than what has been discussed at the tax about making sure that residents in the incorporated areas are acutely aware of what is going on and what the plan is. And I have concerns about that. I recognize the value of taking advantage of economy when you can in this budget, but there will be no budgets or programs formally in the incorporated areas unless there is more of an emphasis either on the technical advisory committee's part to make sure that it really gets moved to another department like a PIO or wherever it happens in our various cities. It won't get done. And then we're going to be the people who live in the cities, who represent people in the cities, who get the telephone calls from folks who didn't know there was a meeting and don't understand why there was a meeting at a MAC and not near where they live. So I appreciate the desire for economy of scale, but I want to have far more assurances that there's going to be the buy-in from the different jurisdictions, that their staffs are really going to pick up the ball and do this, not just passively. The other thing is, let's see, you have a slide that says, how do you get there? Can you go to that? At the bottom it says Regional Steering Committee.
Yes.
The supervisors have 5 appointments to this body, and I know that, and I would not want to affect their autonomy in making their decisions on that, but that is the one opportunity in this process that allows for suburban and rural residents to also be engaged in this, and I would be very hopeful that the supervisors would take that into consideration as they're making their appointments, or perhaps be willing to expand the number of appointments on that to ensure that they have the opportunity. So I'd like to discuss that with this board. These
I'm happy to offer comments. This is the first I learned that I was going to get an appointment to something like this.
To be honest, we hadn't necessarily envisioned it as a direct appointment by the supervisors, but that we wanted to make sure that there was a diversity of the areas. But certainly, you know,
well,
we can do it that way.
What's interesting, kind of to Susan's prior point, is should I have an appointment, the fellow that I would pick up the phone and call is actually a Roseville resident who's probably going to have predominantly comments about Lincoln and Newcastle.
Sure.
Because that's where he spends most of his time riding, is in the Lincoln New, even though he lives in the city of Roseville.
Right.
And so that, you know, to your point, making sure the public's aware these meetings are taking place is important, but where the improvements are talked about, I guarantee you the city of Roseville folks who are the big distance riders, they're going to have more comments about the unincorporated area than they are about the city.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, we hadn't envisioned, or what we had envisioned was making sure there's broad representation, geographic representation. So the easiest way to look at it was supervisorial districts, because within each of those are the cities.
All the cities, sure.
And I've already talked to staff from each of your jurisdictions to say, hey, who are the key players in your community who are interested in cycling? What are their names? Is this something you think they might be interested? Right. Because, frankly, those are going to be who we will hear from, I think, on this.
Well, I'd sure like to have opportunity in there for people to self-identify their interests.
Yeah. So I think with the public outreach, really trying to, as you mentioned, targeting the PIOs, getting out there, targeting every group we can to get them interested in this, having a email database list to receive, for them to sign up, for them to receive information on during updates. I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and we have not at this point really penciled out all those details. So I think this is very helpful, what you're identifying as kind of areas where you see we can improve upon and make sure that we deliver the quality program.
And to that, again, to that point, Folsom, the number of cyclists that come streaming across the county line on any given Saturday or Sunday up into Granite Bay on their way up to Auburn or Newcastle or wherever. So, and the Folsom Cycling Club is huge. The Folsom folks right there, and they're right down by the dam road. Their little shop is right down there. So, just reaching out to the neighboring jurisdictions who use our unincorporated roads.
Yes, Keith.
Just for the sake of argument, when I first read that, I looked at the supervisorial districts. My first thought was, if everyone on a PCTPA had one appointment to that committee, we would take care of the jurisdictions in all 5 supervisorial districts. But I understand also that this is a county and unincorporated thing and see the 5. But my first thought was, if everyone here made an appointment, that would take care of both the jurisdictions and all of the supervisorial districts. But I put that out for thought.
That's certainly an option.
Well, my only comment is that I want the board to be aware that ultimately this is a plan that we would provide to the county for adoption. It's not a PCTPA plan. It's a county plan. So I don't want to step on any toes either.
Sure. As an alternate, perhaps I'd like to throw out for a response from Celia and then board members. If we were to approve this and ask you to come back after your next technical advisory committee meeting and give us an update as to what the actual outreach program is going to look like after you've talked with all the cities and how they're going to handle it, if we could see in a subsequent report from you what a robust outreach is. Maybe we could keep going.
Let me suggest this. Perhaps we can reflect some of these comments and do the RFP on this and get proposals back then that we can have the board consider, because the consulting community may have some great ideas on how we can accomplish that kind of outreach in a cost-effective way. Because ultimately, this will come back to the board for approving that contract.
Okay. Is that meeting with general satisfaction?
I'd just like to throw, yes, it is, certainly from my standpoint, but I'd like to throw out one other possible point of contact that we haven't discussed, and that would be the bike shops. I mean, every bike owner goes to a bike shop at one point in time to get something. And somehow involving that point of contact might be the best way to distribute among the actual users.
Sure. All right. That's probably plenty of discussion. Does someone wish to make a motion?
I think we should just direct staff to finalize the scope of work, release the request for proposals, and form a regional bikeway plan steering committee.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks, staff. All right. The next item on our agenda, I've lost, is the executive director's report.
And yes, this month I have quite a bit. Things have been happening out there, and I want to update the board on. First, I'll start with some good news. The awards for cap and trade funding were announced last week, and the Sacramento to Roseville third track Phase 1 project, which will allow 3 round trips a day to Roseville on the Capital Corridor service, was awarded funding. That project is now fully funded at just shy of $79 million. And the funding comes from all state sources. So once the paperwork gets done, this has to go to the California Transportation Commission for some blessings and so on. Then Union Pacific can go ahead and get started on design. I am told that they are quite motivated to get moving on this, and so best case scenario, it'll probably be about 2 years before we see the improvements and see the trains. Worst case, 3 years. So by 2019, we should be having 3 round trips a day on the Capital Corridor service. So that's, I can't emphasize enough how huge this is. We've been working since 1991 to try and get more trains into Placer County, and we finally have the funding and the agreement to make it happen. So that's a huge milestone for us. It's certainly not the end game. We still want to bring 10 round trips a day to Roseville and 4 round trips a day to Auburn, but this is heading in the right direction. So that's very exciting news. So then we go to the perhaps less exciting information, and that is an update on what's going on with the state in terms of transportation funding. Many of you may have gotten information from the League of California Cities or the California State Association of Counties on the Fraser-Bell agreement in proposal on transportation funding for California. And this is a combination of an increase to the gas tax, some moving some money around, and additional, what do they call it? The registration fees. And some increases to the diesel excise tax as well as the sales tax on diesel. It's an entire package of funding, about $7.4 billion that would go for transportation. And essentially a big chunk of that would go to the jurisdictions for road rehab, as well as to Caltrans for road rehab, and then smaller amounts to transit, a little bit to the active transportation program. And this is, as I say, gotten a lot of excitement. This is part of the extraordinary session that the governor called for the legislature last year that, frankly, has not met since last year. So it's this. I will provide my take on this. This is heralded as being a big step forward. I don't see it. No matter how you slice it, it's a little different take on the same kind of ideas and package that have been proposed by both Senator Bell and Assemblyman Frazier last year. The governor has its own proposal that's about half that. All of these require a 2/3 majority of the legislature, and I just don't see the votes there. As I was conferring with Chair Rohan, we've beat our head against this wall many times in the past. And so if it does pass, and I would love to be wrong, if this does pass, it will be a real improvement to our road rehab money. But in terms of Measure M, the transportation sales tax, it does not cover all of our transportation needs for road maintenance, and it does absolutely nothing for capacity improvements. So this would not help the 8065 interchange. It would not help widen 49 or 65. It wouldn't do any of those things. So it does not take the place of what we're doing locally. It would be great as an additive to that, but as I say, I'm not holding my breath. I'll put it that way. So I wanted to provide that update to the board as you're hearing more about this. And then finally, I wanted to give somewhat of an update on the Measure M effort. I know that board members are involved with this. I'm doing a lot of fact and figure outreach to various groups because I'm getting a lot of requests. What is Measure M? What does it mean? What's in it? That sort of thing. And so I've been doing a lot of those kinds of presentations. And I know that there is a campaign committee that is working as well. But we're a planning organization, and so I want to think about what happens if Measure M passes in November and be able to hit the ground running in terms of dealing with what that means and getting projects done. So we are starting to figure out what we need to do as an organization to be ready in case Measure M does pass. And so what I am planning to do is bring to you probably in September, possibly in October, and a request for qualifications for a financial advisor to help us figure out funding for or how we would handle bonding so that we would be able to get started on the 8065 interchange, 65 widening, figuring out what our highest priority projects are that we need to front money for, Placer Parkway, another one, and figure out the financing of that so we'll be ready to hit the ground running. And of course, releasing that RFQ, we would get the bids in. Any award would be contingent on the passage of Measure M because without that, it's kind of a moot point. And then we would do follow up with an RFQ for the bonding. We're learning a lot about this, and it's really important that we be prepared to move very quickly because if the voters do pass this, they're going to want to see results, and we want to be able to deliver them. So with that, and also I'd be developing sort of the budget and the structure of a post-sales tax agency. I think, we would need to do a little bit more staffing. Certainly we would have to budget accordingly. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Keith.
Celia, and I'm not sure about the extensity of the efforts so far, but I'm still getting some pushback maybe from some leaders in the party in the Central Committee that are talking about taxes and we can find the money elsewhere. And I'm wondering if we've done enough outreach to them because basically I'm getting chastised for supporting the measure. I don't mind that. You get chastised no matter what. But it seems like people that should really understand this a lot better still don't. So have we really lobbied some of the party central committees and
this is where it gets a little bit delicate because as a staff person, I don't lobby. I provide facts and figures.
That may not have been the right word.
That said, I provided staff support to Chair Rohan, who did a presentation to the Republican Central Committee. There's been a lot of outreach by folks, but whether what people retain or what people, have an opinion on what you say, that's entirely up to them.
It just shows me what we're up against because the people that really should be informed and understand this to the greatest extent are still a little bit narrow-minded.
Madam Chair, might I provide a little bit of color to Mr. Nesbitt's inquiry?
Yes, a little bit of color.
Okay. Just a little bit. The chair and I and several of the folks sitting up here actually had the opportunity to attend the Central Committee meeting in July. Susan and Diana Russlin and Stan had written a letter to the Central Committee after they managed a procedural maneuver to put the item on their agenda in June, even though it hadn't been agendized. A couple of members got it in front of the body, and with us having no opportunity to present, they were able to pass an opposition to the measure unanimously. So that prompted the letter. We went and spoke. I will say that There were a number of folks in attendance who were willing and did listen and heard the points that were made. There were others that were as persuadable as that maple bar. They simply were not going to listen and enjoyed the opportunity to do nothing but try to talk over us. If we have a victory that came out of it, there was a motion to reconsider their opposition. Their motion to reconsider the opposition failed 21-18. For the Central Committee to vote to oppose or support requires 2/3. So what that tells me is, had we had the opportunity to actually present the facts to the committee prior to them running their drill on the procedural motion the month before, they would not have had the 2/3 to oppose. So the people that you're talking about, I believe, are the part of the group that ran the drill to get the opposition before the facts were presented, and they will not be persuaded.
And that was before the board even voted to put it on the ballot.
Yes, it was before the Board of Supervisors had even voted to put it on the ballot. They had taken a position of opposition.
We're wrong in the first place?
That's yeah.
All right. Let's move on to item J. This is an opportunity for the board to offer direction to the staff. All right, seeing none. Item K is informational items, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn. All right, we have a motion. Is there a second? Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.